So today I'm going to be walking through how I made this Princess Jasmine inspired top and trousers co-ord. Both of the patterns are available on my Etsy. The trousers are my Elma pattern and the top is my Jasmine pattern. Tried to make everything as beginner friendly as possible, and I think that's everything, so let's get on with the video. So for this project you will need some pins, some fabric scissors or something to cut out your pattern pieces, something to draw out your pattern pieces. I'm using fabric pens. For the top I'm going to be using some flat braided elastic. This is 5 to 6 millimeters wide. This is optional but I would recommend it. And for the trousers I'm going to be using a wider piece of flat braided elastic. This is about 1 inch wide, that's for your waistband. And then I'm also going to be using some interfacing for the hems on my trousers. I'm going to be using my overlocker for the majority of this project, but you can also use a sewing machine with zigzag stitch instead. For the fabric, I'm going to be using the same fabric for top and trousers. This is a 4-way stretch cotton jersey. It's 95% cotton, 5% elastane, and I got this from Little Legs Fabrics. So I'm going to start by working on the top, which is a crop top with a gathered front and flutter sleeves. So for the top, I've got 3 pattern pieces. I've got this regular scoop neck, which is going to be the back of the top. I've got the front of the top, which is more of a square neck. And then I've also got the sleeve. So for each one of these pattern pieces, you're going to need to cut 2 out of your fabric. So for your sleeve, you need 2 for 1 sleeve for each side, and then for each of your top pieces, for the front you need 2 and 1 is going to act as a lining, and then for the back you need 2 pieces and 1 is going to act as a lining. So if you want, you can do a different colour for the piece that's going to act as your lining. I'm just going to do mine all in the same colour just to make it more simple. So I'm just going to get everything cut out and then I'll show you how it looks when I have finished. So I've just finished cutting out all of my pattern pieces. So these are the pieces for the back of the top. Like I said, one of these is going to be a lining. So if you want to do that in a different colour, you can. I've just gone with the same colour for both pieces. And then it's pretty much the same thing for the front of the top as well. I've got the 2 pieces and one of these is going to be for the lining. And then I've also got my 2 sleeve pieces. There is a mark on the pattern that shows you where the centre point of the sleeve is. So I've just gone ahead and marked that in place because that's going to show where I can attach the sleeve to the top. So starting with the back of the top, I'm just going to take my 2 pieces and lay them right sides together, and I'm going to start to pin them in place. So I'm going to pin along this bottom line and then along the neckline. So now that I have pinned those areas in place, I'm going to go in and sew those 2 layers together with my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. So just straight across the bottom and then straight around that neckline. So now that I've just sewn these seams in place, I'm going to take my flat braided elastic and just sew that straight on top of those 2 seams. This is optional, but it will give your top a little bit more extra structure. So I'm literally just going to place that straight on top of the seam that I just sewed and place that under the foot and then sew it round. I'm just going to use this finger to guide it without stretching it and just sew it in place. Just trim that off and then sew it the rest of the way with the seam. So now I'm just going to repeat that for the bottom seam as well. So this is how your top should look once you've added your elastic. And then I've just gone in with my front piece of my top and repeated all of those same steps. So I've got the elastic along the bottom and the elastic around the neckline as well. This neckline will be a little bit more tricky than the other one just because it has tighter corners, but you should be able to just pull it straight when you're adding the elastic, which is how I do it. So then you can follow a completely straight line when you add your elastic like that, and then once you fold it back out it will look something like this. So I'm going to turn this piece to the right side out now. So now that I've turned that to the right side out, I'm just going to find the center point, which is where I'm going to gather the top. So the easiest way to do that is to just fold it in half and kind of press over this fold. You can also press this with an iron if you want more of a obvious line. So I've just got my line there, hopefully you can see that. And then the gather you can do in one of two ways. You can either sew straight up this line and then pull your threads to gather it in the middle, or you can gather it kind of more manually like this and then sew that in place. So I think I'm going to do it the first way with doing the stitch up the middle. I'm going to use just a normal hand sewing needle to do this. You can also do it on a machine. If you are doing it on a machine, I would recommend setting your machine to the highest stitch length. So you want quite long stitches so that you'll be able to pull them and gather them as much as you want. But I'm just going to do this with a hand sew. So I just have my needle and thread here, and I'm just going to follow along that central line. If you do decide to do this with a machine, you want to make sure that you don't secure the ends of the stitch. So don't reverse over each end or don't tie it off, because obviously you need to pull it to be able to gather. I'm literally just gonna follow all the way up here with a standard running stitch. So it's gonna look like this all the way up here. So I'm just gonna finish doing that part. So this is how that looks once you've done your whole running stitch. And then I'm going to pull the thread from either side until I have the top gathered as much as I want. I think that looks about right. And then with this thread that I've got spare that's still attached, I'm just going to thread that back onto my needle, and then I'm going to go through all of those layers. To secure that in place. So I'm going to go back and forward on this a few times to make sure it's secure. You can do this on your sewing machine, but because there are two layers and it's gathered, it might be quite tricky to sew over the top of this. I know that my machine probably wouldn't cope with this thick a layer, but if yours would, if you've got a better machine than me, because mine's quite a cheap one, you can definitely do this on a machine. So you'd literally just sew back and forward. That'd definitely be a bit more secure, but this should work fine anyway. So that's how that's looking so far. I think that's as gathered as I need it to be. And then I'm going to flip over to the back and just tie it off. I also need to tie off the piece from the bottom as well. So you can see I've just tied off the two ends there, and then the front of the top will look like this. So now that I've finished gathering this top, I can attach my two tops together. So I have the gathered one the right way out, and the back side is still inside out. So I'm going to take this gathered one and place it inside the piece for the back, which should still be inside out. If you have used a different fabric for the base fabric and the lining, which obviously I haven't here, but if you have, you want to make sure that the right fabric is facing the right fabric. So if your lining is cream, for example, you want to make sure that cream fabric is facing cream. Obviously not a problem at all if you're using the same fabrics. So I'm just placing this gathered one inside my other piece and starting to match up all of my corresponding edges. So here I've just got the strap from the gathered one inside the other one and pin that in place. I'm going to do the same with the other strap. and again pin that in place. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the sides of the top. So I've got the side of the gathered one here. I'm going to pin that along the side of the back of the top. You should be pinning through 4 layers of fabric for each one of these points now. And then I'm just going to do the side on the opposite side. So then your top will look something like this when it's all pinned in place. It will kind of be scrunched around because of the gathering on the other top. So I'm going to go in and sew across each of these sections now. So straight across the top of the straps and down the side of the top. Again, making sure that you get in 4 layers of fabric when you do this. I'm going to be using my overlocker, but you can also use zigzag stitch. So that's how that will look once it's all sewed in place. And now I'm just going to turn this to the right side out, which you can do through the armhole. So now I'm just going to move this to one side to start working on my sleeves. So this is how the sleeve looks, and then obviously I've got my center point up here. So I'm just going to take this and fold it in half, and then you can see a straight line here. I'm just going to pin along that line. And now I'm going to sew down this edge with my overlocker or a zigzag stitch, and then that will look something like this. So that is attached down that seam. So now I can attach this to the top. So I'm going to find the mark that I left, which is my center mark, and that is going to attach to this seam here, which is the top of the strap. So I'm just going to take the sleeve on my hand like this and place it over the top of that armhole. Now I can start to pin things in place. So let me find that center point again, and then I'm going to place that just on top of that point at the top of the sleeve. I'm going to pin that in place. And then I'm going to find, well, this is the seam that I just sewed on the sleeve, and I'm going to match that up to the side of the top and just pin that in place as well. And now that you've got those 2 points in place, I'm going to go and pin the rest of this armhole around that sleeve. So this is how that will look once the sleeve is in place, and the way you can check if you've done it right is to just fold it out and see if that looks like a sleeve, which this does. So I'm just going to follow around that edge with my overlocker and sew it in place. Again, you can use a zigzag stitch as well. So that's how the sleeve looks once I've sewn it in place. And I can just turn this to the right side out. I've also done the other sleeve at the same time. That's how that looks. And now the only other thing that I need to do is to finish off the hem of the sleeve. So a kind of hems I would recommend is a single hem with interfacing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my interfacing, place it at the bottom of the sleeve like that, and then fold up that bottom edge of the sleeve. Then I'm going to take my iron and press that in place. And then once I have done that for both sleeves, I'm going to secure it in place with a zigzag stitch. So I've just finished sewing those hems in place. So I literally just folded it over with the interfacing, pressed it in place, and then sewed straight over the top with the zigzag stitch. And then once you've done that, the top is finished. So now I can move on to the trousers. So now I'm going to move on to work on the trousers, which are a very simple, just wide leg trouser with pockets. So for my trousers, I've got 3 pattern pieces. So I've got this piece, which is the main piece for the trousers. I'm going to cut 4 of these from my fabric. If you're using a fabric with a wrong and right side, which I'm not, I'm just using a block fabric. But if you are, you need to make sure that you cut 2 in this orientation with this curve facing right. And then you need to flip the pattern like this and cut another 2 in this orientation with the curve facing left. But you need 4 in total of those. You just need to make sure you've got 2 in one orientation and 2 in the other orientation. You also have the pattern piece for the pocket, which you also want 4 of these. And again, if you have a fabric with a right and wrong side, you want to draw 2 in this orientation with your straight edge facing left and 2 in this orientation with your straight edge facing right. And then you also have a piece for your waistband. So you only want to cut 1 of these out, but you want to cut it on a fold. So you want to line this up right onto the fold of the fabric. And then once you cut it out, you can open up your waistband and it will be double the length of this piece. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut all of my pieces out from my fabric, and then I'll be back to show you how that all looks once it is all cut out. So I've just finished cutting out all of my pieces. So this is my waistband and I cut it on a fold here, which means if I fold it out, it is twice the length. So I've just got 1 of those. And then in my pockets, I've got 2 in one orientation and 2 in the other orientation. Like I said before, this is a block fabric with no right and wrong side. So in theory, they can go in any direction and be fine. But it's good to get into a habit of cutting the different orientations no matter what fabric you're using. But if you are using a fabric with a printed side, you need to make sure that you do them 2 in one orientation and 2 in the other. And then I've also got 4 pieces cut out for my trousers. I did forget to mention there is a mark on the pattern that shows you where the top of the pockets will attach to. So I've just marked that on each one of my pieces, and it's exactly the same as with the pockets, making sure that you've got 2 in one orientation and 2 in the other. But obviously I've got a block fabric here. So I'm going to start by putting my trouser pieces together. So taking 2 of my pieces and with right sides facing together, I'm just going to pin along this curved edge here. So I've just pinned that in place. So I'm going to go in and sew this with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch, literally just this curve here. And then at the same time, I'm also going to add my pockets just to make it a little bit easier. I'm just going to open my trousers out like so. And then I've got a mark here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, which is the mark from the pattern that shows where the top of the pocket attaches to. So I'm going to take one of my pocket pieces and I'm going to line up this straight edge of the pocket here with the straight edge of the trousers and the top of the pocket here to the mark that I've got on here. So just lining at the top of that pocket up to the mark, and then the straight edge of the pocket to the straight edge of the trousers. And then just pinning that in place. I'm just going to go and do that for the other side as well. So now I'm going to go in and just sew down this straight edge here with my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well, and also sew this curved edge in place too. I'm going to do this one first and then sew the pockets in place. So I've just finished sewing this curve in place and my pockets. I'm just going to open this out. And then I've just repeated all of those steps for my other pieces for my trousers. So I'm going to take that one and lay it on top with right sides facing together. I'm just going to match all of my edges up. And then I'm just going to pin and sew straight down the edge and then up the center of where the kind of crotch area is. I'm going to do that and then sew it in place, and then I'm going to lay everything out on the floor so you can see properly where I've sewn, because obviously it's such a big piece, it's quite difficult to see on this table. So I'm literally just going to go down and round the pockets and down the side, and then straight up the center as well, which will be a kind of like triangle shape. But I'll go and do all of that, and then I'll show you exactly what I've done. So this is how it will look once you've sewn everything together. So I sewed just above the pocket here, around the pocket, down this leg, and then straight up the middle on both sides, and then obviously I did this side as well. So that was with right sides facing together, and just sew your two pieces together like that. So now I can move on to making my waistband. Like I said, there is a table on the instructions that will tell you how much elastic you need. So I'm just going to take my two ends of the elastic and pin them together. I'm going to sew down that edge, and then I'm going to do exactly the same with my fabric. So I'm going to take right sides together and pin these short ends together. And then sew down that edge with a zigzag stitch or overlocker. So then you'll have two pieces that are like a continuous circle. So now that I've sewn these edges in place, I'm just going to take the fabric piece and fold it in half so that it looks like this. And then taking the elastic, I'm going to place that inside that loop. So then you can see there, you've got that elastic between that folded layer of fabric. So now I'm just going to go in and sew all the way around that bottom edge where the fabric is open. I'm going to pin it in place and sew so that everything is completely enclosed. Obviously make sure that when you're sewing you don't get the elastic in your stitch. Just sew right around that bottom edge. So this is how your waistband should look when you've sewn everything together. And now I can move on to adding this to the trousers. So I'm just going to start by finding the quarter points for the waistband. So I'm going to start by putting a pin along that seam and then folding that in half. I'm going to put a pin just where the fold is, and then if you fold it in the other direction, so those two pins sit on top of each other, I'm going to put a pin in each fold on this side. Now I'm going to grab my trousers piece and I'm just going to turn this to the right side out. So then this is the waist section at the top. I can just start to match up my pins with the seams. So I'm going to take this pin at this seam and pin that in place at the top of the trousers. And then you have another seam on the same side. So I'm going to take the pin on this side and pin that in place as well. And then exactly the same for these seams that you have at the front and back. I'm going to take this pin and pin it in place. And then again, this one at the back, just matching it up to where your pin is and placing that through the trousers. And now I'm just going to put some pins in between all of those placements just to keep everything in place. So now that I've finished pinning that around the top of the trousers, I can sew that in place. I'm going to do that with my overlocker. Obviously you can use a zigzag stitch as well. You can just check you've done it right by folding it up and seeing how it's going to look. So that looks absolutely fine. So I'm going to go and sew that in place. So this is how that looks once it's sewn in place. You can fold it up and it will look like this. And now the only thing left to do is to hem the bottom edge of the trousers. So to do that, I am going to just find that very bottom edge, and I'm going to take my interfacing, place that at that bottom edge, and then fold up the fabric over the top of the interfacing, and then press that in place with my iron. Let me just zoom in a little bit actually. So you can just see my interfacing here, and then I'm going to take that bottom edge and fold it up and over the interfacing, and then press it in place with your iron. So I'm going to do that all the way around both of my trouser legs, and then I'm going to sew it in place with a zigzag stitch. So I'm literally just going to sew straight over the top of that hem with my zigzag, and I'll show you how that looks once I've done it. So this is how it will look once it is folded over and pressed with the interfacing. So I'm literally just going to go and sew straight on top of that with a zigzag stitch now. So I've just finished sewing that in place, and now my trousers are done and I can try everything on together.